I'm Simon and I'm the Chief Engineer Trackside, and today I'm going to talk to you about the engineering station in the garage, which is also known as either the Centre Console or Fantasy Island. Sat at this end, first of all we've got Toto. He doesn't sit on the pit wall because he tells us he doesn't trust himself, but we think there's some other reasons which he's not going into. He's got two intercom panels here, and on this screen he'll watch the race timing and the race video feeds, the same as everybody sees at home more or less. On the intercom panels you can see he's got a wide variety of channels that he can use to talk to individuals or to groups, and those groups include people he might want to talk to about the tyres, the strategy, the engineering, concerns we've got on the car, the engine, and the engineers in particular. So if he needs to communicate with the drivers, you very infrequently hear him talking to the drivers before the end of the race, but he does quite often ask Ricky and Bono to ask questions of the drivers, or ask the pit wall to ask questions of the drivers. Normally when Toto sat here in the race, he's sitting there very calm, and you get these long shots of him on TV from across the garage from a three-quarter view. Sometimes he's got his comms buddies around him, also plugged in. When things aren't going so well, he's been known to lash out at the desk and batter it a few times, but we've got a new desk this year and we're optimistic that it'll make it through Christmas. In pole position on the console, Bono and Ricky, who look after respectively Lewis and Valtteri, and they are coincidentally within striking distance of Toto, but we have had no reports of assault yet. Bono and Ricky are the primary communication with the drivers. So during the race, 99% of the voice comms that you hear out on the radio to Lewis and Valtteri will be from Bono and Ricciardo. So there's a large number of questions that we want to ask of the drivers during the race, and similarly there's a large number of questions the drivers might want to ask of us during the race about where their strategy is going, when they're stopping. All of that comms is channeled through Ricky and Bono, and what they have to do is to try and understand when's a good time for the driver around the lap, when's it quiet, and they will get that out to the driver in as concise a method as possible. To give you some idea of the scale of the job, the people that will typically be talking want to pass messages to the driver during the race: strategy, tyres, engine, performance engineers, aerodynamicists, Toto, James, Shove, everybody. It's really busy. So you can say all the stations are more or less the same, which is to say they've got two screens, and we use them for remote accessing a laptop or a PC that's elsewhere in the infrastructure. There's one intercom panel. It has 12 primary channels on it, but then there's a shift page with another 12 channels. Most of these guys don't want to get overloaded, so they tend to keep it down around the 5 or 6 channels. Bono will have, obviously, Lewis. He will listen to radio comms from Lewis. He can also speak to pit wall regarding strategy, tyres, and he will get occasional messages from Aero about wear and tear on the car. Next to Bono is performance engineer. In Bono's case this is Marcus, and in Ricky's case over the other side for Valtteri it's Oog. These guys have a similar job but without the driver comms. So the primary focus of the performance engineer is to understand the performance of the car. In free practice and qualifying sessions, that means comparing performance between the two cars, so they can look at Valtteri's data and see where Valtteri's making gains on Lewis and vice versa. During the race there's a bit less comparison between the cars, but it does still go on if we can identify problems that need addressing. Otherwise these guys will look at making sure they're in the best mode for the management of the diff, the engine, looking after the tyres and all of that. So these guys also pull together a lot of information from the other people in the garage and will pass it in a concise form to Bono, so that Bono can pass it out to Lewis, and similarly on the other side, so Ricky can pass a concise instruction to Valtteri to help him out if there's somewhere on circuit that he's got a weakness. The guys who are not symmetrical across the garage, which is to say on this side we have Michael, who looks after the tyres, and on the other side we have at this event Ed, who's looking after the aero. So the tyres is a big part of making the race strategy work, and there's a lot of analysis goes on both here and back in the RSR in Brackley, and that analysis consists of looking at the literally hundreds of channels of data we have coming in that relate to tyre temperatures, tyre pressures, and from that we try and understand where we are in the life of the tyre. If we need to eke out the life of the tyre a little bit better, where we can best do that around the lap, so which corners are causing the most damage to the tyres, and perhaps also which corners are not giving us as much lap time as they are causing us damage. On the other side, similarly, we have one aero guy at the track who tries to look after the specification of the car and the physical state of the aerodynamic surfaces, as well as coordinating the workload of the aerodynamicists in our RSR back in Brackley. we have typically over 100 pressure tappings or even a race car, let alone a test car, and we'll be monitoring those to make sure that we're happy with the performance of the rear wing, that it's not stalling, that the floor is performing okay, the diffuser's performing okay. Those pressure tappings can be used to identify damage to aero surfaces. Obviously there's not much we can do about it during a race, but if we start to see evidence of damage in free practice or qualifying, it may affect how we decide to run the car, or if we want to pull the car in early and make some improvements to it to get it back into a better shape. And then right on the end here we have two positions which are pretty similar, but we use them slightly differently. So on the ends here in sessions, the number one mechanics and the engineers can use these positions here to monitor the health of the car, so that when we're trying to fire it up and get it out of the garage, we can make sure that it's in a good state to send. If Bono, for instance, wants to make a ride height change, he will put a request onto a job list that we manage live, and then that will get ticked off on the end here when the workload's been completed by the crew on the car. This space, as you can imagine, gets very busy in session because the tyres and the car itself is not far away, so there's a lot of activity in this narrow corridor, which is why we don't rely on voice comms or even radio comms in session. We instead do everything by a formalised job list on a screen. Each side of the centre console we have screens that show normal timing page data and video feed, and that's because it's a useful place for the mechanics during the race to keep on top of where the car is on track and when it's coming in, and also for the guys that are here looking at car data, they also need to be able to look up and see the FIA messages. Also new for this year, obviously, you will have noticed a lot of us wearing masks, and we've had to put in dividers in order that we can maintain some semblance of distancing between the engineers who spend long periods of time stood here next to each other, and we need them to be able to feel like they're in a reasonably safe environment. Hopefully you've found something interesting in what I've talked about on the centre console, and it's given you some insight into what happens in the engineering world. Hopefully also you haven't managed to see too much detail on the screens, because we've done our best to try and obscure the detail of it. But if there are any interesting questions you've got about stuff you've seen today, do get in touch.